Hello, I'm Sam Gerrans. Today is Monday, 12th of February, 2024, and today we're going to be discovering some more reasons why you live in a cult. Okay, now last week I looked at the first of four sections of Stephen Hassan's BITE model, which stands for Behavior, Information Control, Thought Control, and Emotional Control. And as I said last week, the reason why I look at this is because I'm just interested in how cults work. It's a way that I relax. And I've listened to many ex-cult members from many cults talking about their experiences. But one of the things I found most interesting is that I think there are several, I did go over this last week, but I'm going to rehash it for people who haven't heard this. I find this whole question quite interesting, and I find some of the people who create these cults interesting, but not in the way that they're sort of presented by the followers. L. Ron Hubbard, for example, I read a couple of biographies about him, and leaving aside the hagiographies created by the Scientologists, he was no doubt an interesting, albeit somewhat crazy, but definitely a very interesting man. Again, but not for the reasons that the Scientologists say. But what was very interesting to me is that all these cults have a lot of things in common. They have various characteristics in common, and this is what Stephen Hassan, in his quite famous BITE model, has summarized. And I read through, and I have the list here. As if you saw the last one, I looked at behavior control and just went through all of the characteristics and identified why they're true in the cult that you're living in. And what I found interesting about people who have been in these cults is, apart from the fact that it's taken a lot of courage for them to leave and so on, is that despite the fact that you would think that they would be the best prepared, the most educated people with the highest degree of possibility of understanding that this is a cult, they don't. I've not seen one yet, not even among some of the more sort of conspicuous spokesmen for these groups. I'm not going to name names, I don't see the point, but if you're in this space, you'll know who I'm talking about. None of them get it. What they do, fascinatingly to me, is they just adopt this cult, and they adopt it, you can almost tell when they left, because their ideology was, they just embraced whatever was current, whatever was the current orthodoxy at the moment they kind of came out, or quote unquote woke up. That's what they embrace. And NASA and LGBT and whatever it is, evolution or whatever it is, they just embrace the lot of it at that time and don't see any contradiction whatsoever. Now, I'm not here to argue NASA or whatever it is, but isn't it interesting? Now, the reason I think that I'm fundamentally interested in this is because my family are all members of this cult, the big matrix cult. And it's just interesting to me that, seeing as we are heading towards, all-out nuclear holocaust, I'd like to understand kind of why. I think there are quite a lot of reasons, but for me, the West now, in its total delusion, only really makes sense when you realize that it is a cult. So that's one thing. The second thing about this, as I mentioned last week, is that I think cults are basically, there's a sort of unspoken agreement between the little cults and the big cult, the big CIA, MI6, deep state cult. And I think that unspoken agreement basically goes along the lines of something like, you collect data, share that data with us, so that we can crunch those numbers and see if there's anything useful for us, and we won't attack you too much. So that seems to be the way that it works. And it also seems to me that in these cults, no matter which of them it is, whether it's Jehovah's Witness or the Moonies or the Scientologists or whatever, they're basically beta testing in Petri dishes items that they can see, well, that works. We'll roll that out over the sort of the bigger cult. And we've seen that. Shunning, a sort of shunning took place through COVID, a them and us situation. I'm getting into some of this when we're in this talk, but people who basically expressed commitment to the cult, took the the sacraments, the holy sacraments of faith in the pharmaceutical agenda, and those who didn't. Now, I'm not here to argue for or against. I know where I stand on it, but that isn't really my point. My point is that this is utterly cultic behavior. So that's one thing. The other thing, which I think is a sort of a standard amongst all cults, is, and if we're talking about Scientology, or we're talking about, the Children of God, or the Jehovah's Witness, or whatever it is, what I think, and I've never heard anybody speak about this, but what I think is this, that what they're really about is about inducing psychopathic behavior in non-psychopaths. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't psychopaths there, but it's the ability to switch on and off psychopathic behavior, so that I have a brother who's in one of these groups. So, I mean, you'd claim he isn't any longer, but everything he says, everything he thinks, is this. So it doesn't. He's still on the plantation, whether he's picking cotton or not. You know what I mean? And what I see in him, for example, and he's very far from being a psychopath, is that he can switch on and off this. It's not like he goes into, I don't know, sort of his eyes turn white or anything like that. No, it's that he just switches over into a different regime, into a different mode, and then switches back again. And the bigger reason of why I'm interested in all of this is because I believe that this is the only way that the behavior in the West in particular, and I'm not saying this is only the West, if you've seen my broader work regarding technique and so on, I would say that this is actually an implicit part of technique, perhaps even of any social organism. So I'm not attacking it, I'm not fighting it, I'm certainly not trying to change it. I'm saying that this is the only thing that makes sense. If you look, for example, at Germany and Europe, committing suicide. They're committing material suicide through their ideological, cultic adherence to a whole set of thoughts and feelings. Now about Ukraine, but previously about whatever it was, about COVID, or before that it was about terrorism, or before that it was about 9/11, or whatever it was. If I haven't been demonetized by now, I'm sure I will have been, although I don't monetize this channel. But, if you say these words, you get shadow banned. But I've been long shadow banned, so it doesn't really matter. What I'm trying to say is that cult members, they're not just in the Moonies or the Scientologists. And anyway, so we'll jump into it. Last week, as I say, I looked at behavior control, and we went through all of that. If I think of it, I'll link to it down below, but I might not, because I'm kind of busy. So, you've got fingers, eyeballs, screen. If you're interested, you can find it. It's last week on my channel on YouTube, and also I published to Substack. Anyway, we'll jump into it today. Now, today we're on letter I of the 4-part series. You remember, I'm now the archetypal YouTube content producer. 4-part series. Should be 5 really, shouldn't it? Because they like to do this. I don't know why they do. Learn Serbo-Croat in 5 seconds. Yes. Information control. So here we are. We're just going to go through it. I've made a presentation. We'll see how we go. So the first one is deception. The basic 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 main categories. Again, this is from Stephen. This is a synthesis of Stephen Hassan's work on the bite model, looking at cults. All I'm doing is taking that information, which was with no self-criticism whatsoever, as far as I can see, put together in order to describe cults. But as I say, fascinatingly for me, ex-cult members can't see, won't see, refuse to see how this applies to the system that they've now, or the cult that they've now joined. And again, I'm not saying that this is good or bad. Obviously it's evil. I mean, it's really, really evil. So I am saying it's bad, but I'm not trying to change it. I'm saying that, this isn't, I'm not on a sort of, one-man mission to stop the Matrix cult. No, that is never going to happen. And the reason is because every cult is basically a sinkhole for members, followers to jump into. And most people, if you haven't noticed, are followers. They claim they're not, but they are. It's a lie. And the whole idea of, these cults are also evil, sure, maybe they are, maybe they're not, I don't know. But what I do know is that most people want to be told what to think. And it's just supply and demand. Anyway, let's jump into it. Deception. So here we are, deception. I'm just giving you an example. So here we have the aftermath of 9/11. 9/11 is really, really important, and I have made this point a few times about 9/11. Thermite, if you don't know anything about thermite, here you can see it's just been cut right down here. Now, buildings that are blown up, this isn't what happens. But cultic behavior and cultic thought is the ability to kind of get rid of those, to disassociate and not see that. I'm not getting into all of the details of that right now. But if you are interested, I would suggest going to Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Let's see if I can just pull that up. Give me a second. Here we are. Here's their site. It's ae911truth.org, and you've got over 3,660 architects and engineers. These are the people designing these buildings who don't believe this. And, you can just get yourself a basic education in this. These are people who are putting their reputations on the line. And, the fact is the whole thing is, of course, a lie. And there you are. So, now you know. If 19 Arabs with box cutters who couldn't fly a Cessna didn't bring down 3 buildings with 2 planes in New York, then what you're being told cannot be true. Now, pretty much nothing you've been told is true. So that's just par for the course. But what I'm trying to say is that if there is this thing called basic logic. If the kind of the presuppositions of this whole thing, you remember the war on terror, you remember the fact that you can't get on a plane without being, basically molested. All of that, if that's all predicated on an untruth, it still leaves the question, well, who did do it? Well, normally what you'd go to is motive, means, and opportunity. Who had the motive? Who had the means? Who had the opportunity? Well, once you go down that line, well, then you'll discover that all is not what it seems in the state of Denmark. So, I'm not trying to convince you. I'm trying to of anything other than the fact that the bite model of cults fits the society in which you live. That's all I'm saying. Okay, and to call it a cult is just a shortcut of getting to the truth of the matter. So deliberately withholding information. Now, it's not that the information exactly isn't there. I mean, you could choose to go to the website that I've just pointed out to you, but you probably won't, or most people won't. Although, who cares about most people? The point is that what the media, the people that you're trained to think of as somehow the guardians of freedom of speech or whatever you think is you've been trained to think is important, they're never going to tell you this. They're never going to ask these basic questions. And you'll find this even now with the so-called alternative media. And there are some, well-meaning people, but they'll still, call this a conspiracy theory. It's not a theory. It's not a theory to say that 3 buildings were taken down by 2 planes. And, the only time that wrought iron, hardened steel-framed buildings have ever come down, supposedly, ever. 3 times in the same day with 2 planes. What I'm trying to say is that, like any cult, it requires you to believe the unbelievable. And if you don't believe it, then it's going to call you some names. And we'll get into that, in a bit, whether it's an apostate in the case of the Jehovah's Witness, or I can't remember what the Scientologists call people. They've got a word to call you as well. Well, this cult's got something to call you, and we'll get into some of those names in a minute. Let's move on to the next one. Deliberately withhold information. You remember this? But you probably don't. Isn't it amazing that your little life has kind of come back to you and you sort of think, yes, well, I can get on with all the things I thought were important before, like, I don't know, getting my degree or going on holiday or, sleeping with the girl next door. I don't know, whatever it is. But only a couple of years ago, this was happening, but you forgot all about it. Went out of your mind. Yes, and suddenly you were standing with Ukraine and crying blue and yellow tears of a country probably couldn't find on a map and knew nothing about. So anyway, so what about the people who failed to comply with this? Let's see if I can jump into this one, see if I can find it. Here we are. COVID-19, US doctors sue regulator for charging them with spreading misinformation in pandemic. Well, I don't suppose they'll get very far with that. But the point of this is, and I think you could probably see the URL if you're interested in following that up. They were persecuted. And just so you know, that's what happens in cults. They have, they get rid of the old guard and bring in people who are going to be more compliant. And if you want my view is that the COVID thing was a beta test. I said it actually on day one that this is the beta test, and I'd lay odds that it's coming back, and when it comes back, it's going to be way worse. And I'll tell you why: because they got rid of all the good doctors and all the good nurses and all the good policemen, anybody who'd actually stop and say, hold on, what about actual law? What about, for example, the fact that these companies that are pumping you full of, actually, I don't know what, but the people who did know what have all pretty much been, they've been cancelled, haven't they? That there was no comeback on those companies whatsoever. You just had to basically smile and confess your sins and take the sacrament of belonging to the big cult. And that's my point. My point, I'm not arguing medicine, I'm not arguing anything along those lines. I'm saying that this is a cult. If it looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it walks like a duck, chances are it's a duck. All we're doing is walking through the information control. This is the second page of this bite model, and to my mind, it fits perfectly. Anyway, we'll jump into the next one. Distort information to make it more acceptable. Now, you may or may not know, but I happen to live in Russia. I've lived here for about 23 out of the last 30 years. I happen to speak fluent Russian. I have a degree in Russian. Obviously, I have a certain amount of sympathy to Russia and the Russian, position on things. However, it doesn't blind me to what is going on. But I do know something about this country, and I do know something about its history. And I do know something about, for example, its president. I listen to Putin make speeches in Russian, and he's many things but an idiot. He's not an unreasonable man. He's not a dictator. He certainly isn't. This isn't me. I don't believe in democracy. If you want to know, I actually think democracy is an illusion. It's a way of flattering the lowest common denominator. I don't believe in any of it. All right? None. So it's not like I have sort of some ideological predisposition to support Putin. No, but I do listen to what he says. I listen to him in Russian, and I know something about the backstory to Crimea, Crimea, going back to that, and then Ukraine. And what you're being told in the West is it's cartoonish. It just is. In fact, leaving aside the whole Ukraine matter, when I first came out here, and I would read various Western journalists. There was a chap called Osborne for a while, Luke Harding, and various others. There's a chap called Walker at the moment. Of the country that I lived in, which I lived and breathed and had my being every single day of the week, I couldn't recognize that country from these men's descriptions of it. And that was part of how I became very skeptical about not only Western media or media, it's all propaganda. On that note, if you're interested in learning about propaganda and how and why you must have it, I suggest, as I often do, to read Jacques Ellul's book, Propaganda, The Formation of Men's Attitudes. This isn't going to be the main focus of this. In fact, this is a bit of a sideline for me, but since I started it, I want to finish it. While I'm on the subject, I'm going to make a video quite soon. I hope to kind of inform people about the rest, in fact, the main part of what I've been doing. But I thought this was worth doing. Let's just cover this in 4 videos, and then, we can all shut up. I can shut up about it, not bother with it. But Putin's, unprovoked war of aggression, if you just count up how many times you've heard that phrase, and then if you actually understand that actually no part of that is true. I'm not saying Russia's perfect. Nobody's claiming that. No Russian that I know would claim that. You could stop any Russian, I could go outside now and stop any Russian and say, tell me what you don't like about Russia. And we could sit down and have a long conversation about it. No one's claiming that Russia's perfect. But that's not the proposal. The proposal is that Russia, for no reason whatsoever, totally unprovoked, went into a sovereign country and started killing people. And if you think that, it just shows how conditioned you are. And that's fine. It's natural that you should be conditioned. Followers follow. What I am saying, my actual point, is that it's a cult. That's your cult. You're welcome to it, but it is one. Okay, let's move on to the next bit, if we can stand any more of it. Oh yeah, before we do, if you are remotely interested in understanding a broader perspective on this, I recommend looking up on YouTube, Why is Ukraine the West's Fault? Featuring John Mearsheimer. That's got 29 million views now. And this is an 8-year-old video by an American academic who he has nothing in particular, in favor of Russia, isn't he? He's not, a Putin shill or whatever else, you've heard them called. He's just an academic. Anyway, if you're interested. Next one. Yes, distort information to make it more acceptable. And we're going to get into this in a minute with Tucker Carlson and Putin downstream. But if you followed this at all and you've seen the howling, kind of mental meltdown that the Western media has had because a journalist went to Russia to interview the president of the country that you're all going to get, hungry and cold because of what's happening. You'd think that the journalists would all go, great, finally somebody's got an interview with Putin. We're going to find out what he really thinks. But no, because they're terrified that he's going to expose them. Anyway, we'll leave that for a bit later on. Next one. Okay, distort information to make it more acceptable. Yeah, here's a good one. In this cult that you live in, the idea is that there's this terrible racial crime and it's all white people against black people. Well, that's not true. If you look at the statistics, it absolutely isn't true. I looked up, I think it was the 2001, 2002 when I lived in the UK, the government's own statistics for race crime, and it was vastly disproportionately against whites. But you don't know that. You wouldn't think that. That's not the impression that you're given. And it's a lot to do with the reporting. You see, if a black kills a white or an Asian kills a white or something, it's just a crime. But if it's the other way around, then it's a racially motivated crime. And all I'm trying to point out to you is that there is a double standard. There's no way that these things are ever, it's never, they're never really comparing like with like. And there is a dishonest way of presenting things. If you've noticed in the Western media, they'll hide, almost pathologically, the facts of if a black person did it. Whereas if a white person did it, it's, far right, blah, 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 blah. All I'm saying is they're spinning up your mind. And as far as I can see, the only people left in media who work in the mainstream media fall into two categories. They're useful idiots, or they know exactly what they're doing. But that's the price of having a job in that industry. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. Systematically lied to the cult member. Here you are. Here's just one example. I mean, we've touched on 9/11, but Nord Stream. And it should matter to you. If you live in Europe and you don't know, the only reason you had a functioning economy, like a good one, up until a couple of years ago, was because of cheap Russian gas. Cheap, reliable Russian gas. And if you've got green hair and bits of metal in your face and stuff, this won't mean anything to you. But the fact is, if you don't have that, you don't have any industry. And if you don't have any industry, you don't have any wealth. If you don't have any wealth, then that, cafe latte that you so enjoy and all the rest of it, and it's all going away. You see, there's this thing called cause and effect. And I know it probably won't mean an awful lot to you until you get hungry and cold. When you are hungry and cold, you'll suddenly remember. Anyway, everyone knows, if you don't live in what what's sort of rather sort of snootingly called the global south. If you don't live in that, you might not know, but everybody else in the world does know that the Americans blew up Nord Stream. Now that is the biggest case of industrial terrorism ever. But they're still the good guys. America is still, the sort of the shining town, the city on the hill, all the rest of it. I'm not here to convince you of it. I'm just saying that this is cultic. This ability to turn off, to see, as in 1984, two contradictory things and to hold both of them in the mind at the same time. America is democracy and freedom and wonderful and Big Macs and blah, 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 blah. But at the same time, they'll come and blow up your infrastructure. But you've still got to be on their side. And Russia is still evil and bad. Maybe Russia is evil and bad. Maybe that's true. I don't know. But maybe, they're all evil and bad. But a cult isn't going to allow that. And that's the point. Okay? All right. Next one. Yes. To minimize or discourage access to non-cult sources of information, including internet, TV, radio, books, articles, newspapers, magazines, and other media. Now, just, as a point of interest, Russia has been cancelled in the West. Russia Today has been just shut down, taken off YouTube as far as I know. All of their news outlets have been taken away. Now, again, if you live in the West, you've been told that you believe in sort of reasonableness and free flow of information, except now when it's Russia. Okay, Russia is evil and bad in every single case. And yet what's interesting is that most Westerners don't see any conflict in this. And that is what is my point. I'm not arguing here that Russia is amazing and wonderful. I'm arguing that you can't see the double standard. That's what I'm arguing. And I'm also arguing that that characteristic is, in and of itself, cultic. That's what I'm arguing. You're living in a cult. That's all I'm saying. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Oh yeah, there you are. Because they believe in freedom of speech. Next. Okay, critical information. So to minimize or discourage access to non-cult sources of information, including critical information. Now, whether you like him, you don't like him, actually I don't really care. My point is to be about these two men here. We've got Putin on the left and Sergei Lavrov, who is the foreign minister on the right. These men can both give 2, 3, 4 hour extemporaneous interviews from a wide range of questioning, Russian sources, Western sources. Usually if it's an interview with a Western person, although they've given up on that now because there really is no point, very aggressive and unfair line, and ignorant, I have to say, lines of questioning, but they still deal with it. Either of these men could give you a university level lecture on a whole range of subjects. Okay, I'm not asking you to like them. I'm just saying you have to acknowledge, well, if you've got any fairness about you, that they are very accomplished, intellectually accomplished. If you hear how Putin is described in the Western media, it's ranting. He gave a rant. He didn't give a rant. I've listened to his speeches in English. Well, the last one with Carlson in English, because actually they got it right with the azvuchka, with the voiceover. They did a really good job. I was so glad they didn't mess it up with that. But I listened to him his initial 40-minute speech after the beginning of the special military operation. It was a history lesson. Now, on the other hand, this is what you have. You see. It doesn't compare very well, but again, my point isn't, you should be pro-Putin or pro-Lavrov. It's nothing to do with that. But can you not see that, these are your leaders, ostensibly, and this is what, I'll just take the Jehovah's Witness as an example. They have what's called the governing body, and the governing body is a kind of a conglomeration. It's actually, I suppose they're really corporate directors of what is essentially a real estate company. I mean, if you look at the Jehovah's Witness objectively, it's a real estate company. That's what it does. It buys up real estate. But if you look at those men, and if you look at them objectively, they're not very impressive. They're not impressive. Intellectually, they're not impressive in any way. And so if you are a member of that cult, then what you have to do is start making excuses for them. Well, how many excuses are you going to make for these two? Anyway, let's move on to the next one. Former members. Oh, yes. So you have to minimize, discourage access to non-cult sources of information, including former members. So anybody who's today called a conspiracy theorist belonged at some point to the cult. Nobody is born, looking like this chap or saying the kind of things that I say. We were all indoctrinated in this cult. It doesn't matter what wayward position you now hold. You came to that actually by means of a process of questioning and then fighting family, society, jobs, economics, everything. If we're talking, whether we're talking in religious terms, we're talking about, real politic terms, whatever it is. But they've got a name to call you, whether it's heretic or in this case, conspiracy theorist. My point isn't to say that Sam Gerrans is right and you are wrong. No, what I am saying is that this cult operates as a cult. What it does is it will shut you down by using language. Here's another one. Yes, they've got a whole industry trying to keep Jews on the plantation. They've got some names to call them too. Anybody who isn't in favour of murdering wholesale the entire Palestinian people, they've got some names to call you too. Here you are. People who don't want their children to be indoctrinated into perversion and disgusting filth, they've got some names to call you. Far right. You'll be a member of the far right because you don't want your children indoctrinated by these insane women, usually. Another one. Yes, ad hominem attacks against former members. So if you don't want to pay yourself to be ethnically cleansed in your own homeland, you're a racist. But at the same time, and this is my point about cults, at the same time, if you don't think Israel should commit genocide on your dime, you're still a racist. You see what I'm saying? And this is the very eclectic use of these stop terms, which is cultic. I'm not asking you to kind of vote for or against the proposition here. What I'm trying to point out is the characteristics of the beast. This is how it works. This is how they all work. This is how Scientology works. This is how Jehovah's Witnesses work. That's how they work. That's how cults work. That's my actual point. Hope you can see that one. Moving on to the next one. Yes, it must use ad hominem attacks against former members. If you see any form or connection or consistency in all of these policies, like some of the ones I've pointed out up to this point, you are a far-right, anti-Semitic, anti-love conspiracy theorist. All these they kind of get wrapped up in various levels of what kind of an apostate you are. And it is being an apostate because I go back to my previous point, we were all indoctrinated into the same stuff. That's why they have a kind of systematized form of education. They want to make, remember No Child Left Behind? No Child Left Behind to think for itself is what they actually mean. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. And they must keep members busy so they don't have time to think and investigate. And this was actually quite similar under Stalinism, but the means of keeping people busy was slightly different. But although you may see this rolled out in the West at some point, especially if they don't turn Nord Stream back on, was queues. They used to joke that Russians would see a queue and join it and then ask what it was for. So all of your free time was taken up by basically trying to get basic goods so that you could live. It's a bit different in the West now, but I'm sure these are interchangeable. You can change any of these, you can a bit like keys on a keyboard. You can swap bits out, put bits in. Lego set. Here you are. Keep people so busy they don't have any time to think about things. Move on to the next one. Yeah. Okay. Control through cell phone with texting, calls, and internet tracking. Okay, this is another feature. I didn't write this list. This is Stephen Hassan. This is a synthesis of Stephen Hassan's byte model of how cults work. So this is another feature of cults. Well, here we are. Does that mean anything to you? Do you remember this? Not so long ago, but it's all gone out of your mind. Isn't it amazing how insipid you really are? I'm telling you, this is how they see you. They're laughing at you. And you have to admit, they have a point, right? It was only a couple of years ago that you weren't allowed to go and see Granny without permission from the government. But it's all gone out of your mind. And you're still looking to them to save you. You're still listening to them. You're still looking at the media to tell you what to think. That's why they despise you. And you have to admit, they have a point. And that's, let's take, for example, the the governing body of the Jehovah's Witness, or Miscavige in the top of the Scientologists. If you are a psychopath, and I'm not saying that all of the ruling body are psychopaths, although I'm sure they have a few, but Miscavige certainly is one. You can understand why they have nothing but contempt for people who allow them to abuse them. Okay? Well, that's what they've been doing to you. And my point is that that's what cults do. Here you are. Control through cell phone with texting, calls, internet tracking. But it's gone out of your mind. Oh, no. Why? Well, because there's something... Well, first of all, Ukraine, and then there's something good on TV. And anyway, I'm hungry. I need a pizza. I can't concentrate this long. Why haven't I got as much as my next door neighbour? There you are. Something else. Another one. It's cultic. You're in a cult. That's all I'm saying. And as proof, I give a piece of proof, that you're sitting there watching this and you're thinking, yeah, man, you know what? He's right. But I promise you, within 5 minutes of watching this, you'll have forgotten all about it. There you are. Next one. Yes, control through cell phone with texting, calls, internet tracking. They've got the technology there. And again, I'm not complaining. I'm just telling you that's what you're living in. Okay, I've done all the groundwork for this. I don't even know why I'm doing this 4-part series. I think because it just begs to be done. Anyway, if you're still waiting for enough people to wake up or any of this stuff, it just shows you your mind's cooked. You haven't got the brain you were born with. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. Yeah, control through cell phone with texting, calls, and internet tracking. I'm not going up that mountain because I got no signal. Oh no, what happens? What happens if something happens that I can't handle, like anything at all? Because, well, I can't call somebody to come and help me. There you are. Times I feel most naked, without my clothes, without my phone. It's a cult. It absolutely is. And that's my point. All right, let's move on to the next one. Compartmentalize information into outsider versus insider doctrines. And all cults do this. Okay? It doesn't matter what it is. There'll be some way of slicing and dicing the propaganda for the upper echelon and the lower mass. That's how cults work. They test it in Petri dishes, and they roll it out over you lot because you're the big cult. Okay, so here's how it looks at the moment. This is a concept which I think, if I'm not mistaken, Joseph Barrel came up with, of the gold. I could be wrong on that, but he certainly came up with it's the golden billion, where he said, I think it was he who said that there was the garden, which is basically America, well, everywhere in green in this map, and then everywhere else, which is everything on this map that isn't green. But if you look at it, this is measured on USD per annum. Now, median wealth per adult, I would argue with some of these numbers. I don't think that in the United States, even in 2021, the median adult income was between $50,000 and $100,000, or that in the UK it was between $100,000 and $150. I don't think that's true, but that's the perception. But even if it is true, let's pretend it's true. There's something called purchasing power, and according to this, China's really poor, but actually China isn't really poor. And Russia's really poor. Well, actually, although Russians don't earn as much in USD compared to a lot of Americans, although some do, bills here are nothing compared to the West. The cost of petrol here is about half or a third of what it is in the United Kingdom. I mean, there are some things that are more expensive, but food is usually cheaper, and I think getting much cheaper than the West. Bills, like gas bill, electric bill, all those sorts of things. They're very modest compared to other countries. Okay, so it's not really, they're not really comparing like with like, in my view. But that doesn't matter. Just reverting, briefly to my actual point. My actual point is nothing to do with that. My actual point is what they're doing is they're setting up a them and us situation. And that's what cults do. If you're not with us, you're against us. Who said that first? Joseph Stalin, actually. But then it was brought out again by Bush the Younger. Okay, next one. Yes, compartmentalize information into outsider versus insider doctrines. Now what I want to do is get into some of the contradictions, the internal contradictions in this. So here we have, some poor Euro schmuck, and we're going to get into what he thinks, probably, assuming it is a he, European values, because it's a very interesting thing. They talk about European values, what they are: human rights, democracy, rule of law, secularity, rationality, humanistic thinking. It would take a while to get into the weeds of what is actually meant by this and what the actual ideology, in fact, I would say religion, stands behind this. But leaving all of that to one side, because we can't be bothered with any of that, let's just pretend that we're really thick, right? And we just think that these are all good things. Okay, they're all good things. Yippee, yummy, yummy, yummy. All right, we'll move on to what European values actually are. This is, I would say, closer to it. You basically, if you remember our good friend Klaus Schwab, saying, you will be happy and you will own nothing. Yeah. And here we have some bug snacks. Facial recognition, total control. If you don't, down here in the bottom left, if you don't know about what happens when they come take your children in the West, it's a horror story. And it's one of the reasons why we left the West. And as I've mentioned before, I didn't even mention to the nursery that we were leaving. Couldn't trust them. I could see. They looked like, Soviet party members, to be honest. Very, very indoctrinated into their, what we've got down here in the bottom right. And they didn't like the cut of my jib because I looked askance at some of the disgusting filth they'd got ready to pour into my 3-year-old daughter's mind. And yes, standing with the Nazis in Ukraine. This is what Europe, it's some of what Europe looks like. Mainly, I think it's going to be kind of getting greyer and nastier and just more vicious, more hypocritical. But I'm not inveighing against that. You're welcome to it. You've chosen it. You kind of deserve it. My point is somewhat different. My point is that this is how cults operate. They operate in almost like two realities at the same time. And if you can see the contradiction, then they've got a word to call you, a name to call you. You're an apostate or a heretic or whatever it is. So there you are. That's what European values really are. Now, moving on to the next one. Compartmentalize information into insider versus outsider doctrines. And this is the next point. Ensure that information is not freely accessible. Now this is a map showing how Bilderberg group works with inner and outer circles. But there was another point I wanted to make, but I couldn't find a picture for it. Well, not that I looked for very long. But the way the Bilderbergers, for example, work and these various groups is they have series of round tables, and they have inner members and outer members. And that's the way that they work. It's the way the Freemasons work. I'm not going to get very, David Icke on you, but it's just a matter of fact that when you join those groups, they're not telling you what you're getting into. There's no full disclosure, just as there's no full disclosure when you join the Jehovah's Witness. Well, they might kind of indicate that if you get baptized, there is a certain commitment. But you're 15 years old, let's say. This isn't. Or you sign a billion-year contract with the Scientologists. Freemasons work on a somewhat different metric, but there are some similarities. One of which is you don't know what the agenda is. You don't know. And in fact, you never really find out until you're so far into it, there's no way out of it. That's cultic, okay? If you want any power in this system, those real power-hungry people that you knew at school. Well, and especially the the people who wanted to be, form monitor or whatever it was. These are the people who are running your governments now, okay? They can't wait to run into the one-way in kind of mousetrap to get as much power as they can over you. But they get trapped in it too. They know that this is how it works. They know. I mean, if you look at somebody like Bill Clinton doesn't fear being filmed by the CIA so they can hold it over him as some form of blackmail. He wants it. He understands that that's how it works. You bring it on. Where's the one-way mirror? Set up the camera and bring on the girls. They know this is how the system works. Okay, that's why it only ever gets worse, because you've got people. They're segregated in terms of what they know, what they need to know, and what they all know is that you're the bottom of the barrel. All right, it's all about you, because you're the serf. All right, you're the only people who create any actual value, and so it's really about being, on the arc of the rulers of the golden billion, and they can manipulate you lot. Why do you think they use all this propaganda? It's to get things through the White House, to manipulate the sort of erstwhile, as it were, sort of, the nominal rather, decision makers, and to keep you lot rowing the boat. That's it. I mean, I'm in Russia. We don't believe any of this stuff. It doesn't bother, us here, what MSNBC says about Tucker Carlson. Who cares? So it's all about you. You're the commodity. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. Okay. Yes, control information at different levels and missions within the group. So here on the left, we have the somewhat expensive Foreign Affairs, Journal of Foreign Affairs. And on the right, we've got, whatever froth they're currently keeping the drones occupied with. So, you've got the outer party, you've got the inner party, and then you've got the proles. Read, if you do nothing else, read Orwell's 1984. Again, I'm not complaining about it. I'm explaining that that's how it works. We all know this. Again, as I said last week, I'm really just giving a lecture in the blindingly obvious. What if this has any interest, if it is of any value, it is simply to say that all of the characteristics which pertain to cults pertain to this cult too. That's all I'm actually saying. Next one. Yes. One set of understanding for the inner circle. So this is true of cults. For example, when you use the word democracy, for example, you've been primed to think of it as an unalloyed good, a wonderful thing, something that's beyond. It's almost like a holy thing. It's like, I don't know, the Eucharist or the Transfiguration. Democracy. Nobody ever stops and thinks about what they mean by this term. But whatever you mean by that term, I can assure you that Tony Blair, for example, or any of those people at that sort of level, that's not what they mean by it. They mean something. They have an entirely different understanding of key terminology than you do. And they enjoy watching you misunderstand them. Anyway, let's get on to the next one. Again, my point is that this is cultic. So here we are. Yeah, we've got this rather famous meme of elites at the White House, I guess, in the mid-1980s, enjoying a joke together. And, archetypically, the joke is you. Anyway, predictive programming. Why did I move this in? Yes, I've added this, giving bits of truth to the drones. And I think this is something which, so far in my reading of Hassan's byte model, that hasn't been included, is the fact that all cults must include some truth. It's not that lies are the opposite of truth. That's not true, because a complete lie is obvious to spot. It's more to how you manage the bits of truth that you give. And one thing I've learned about the ruling elites, and you'll know this about me if you've studied my broader work, my detailed work, is that they have to warn you. They have to warn you. It's actually a requirement of their religion. And you have to agree. If you noticed with the whole COVID thing, it was all about your choice. That's how they work. They offer you the opportunity to destroy yourself. It's your fault. Of Quranically speaking, if you know my broader work, you'll know that the shaitan on the day of judgment, he just turns around and says, I'm quit of you. I'm quit of thee. I called, you followed. Not my fault. That's how they operate. And I think it's because they know something that they're not telling you about how things actually work. So anyway, so there's a bit of truth in there. Let's move on to the next one. Compartmentalize information into insider outsider doctrines. Yes, allow only leadership to decide who needs to know what and when. Now, if you know my broader work, I don't argue with this. I think it's absolutely natural that there should be a ruling elite. My argument, if you know my broader work, is that my argument is not that against the ruling elite per se, it is that they've gone off the reservation of noblesse oblige and that they've basically reneged on the unspoken contract with the plebs whom they rule. Sorry if that sounds kind of, brutal, but despite what you've been told, you're not amazing, you're not fantastic, you're average. Most people are, it's just normal, okay? And the masses have always been ruled by the elites. My argument is that they're bad rulers, not that there should be no rulers. What's going to happen? What's the alternative? If you listen to the mass of people out there talking about when enough people wake up and blah, 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 what? And replace the ruling elites, what, with you, with no background, you know nothing, you think you're going to be any better? No, they won't be any better. Every iceberg, every mountain has a peak. It's just natural. It's just how it works, okay? I'm not inveighing against there being a ruling elite. It's like Jesus said, okay, the poor you have with you always. Well, the rich you have with you always too. It's just, how things work. But what's happened, if you haven't noticed, is instead of them having any sort of sense of noblesse oblige, an obligation to rule the drones in a, productive way, what they're doing now is going off the reservation and they don't need you anymore. And that's why they're transhumanists. That you've done all the work, you've cleared the bogs, you've built the motorways and all the rest of it. Now they've got machines that don't need you. So now they're working out how to get rid of you. Okay, so what's happened is there's been a sort of a rift in the symbiotic relationship between the proles and the elites. Now they don't need you anymore. And I have to say, it kind of shows. Here you are, compartmentalizing information. So here we have on the left, we have MI5, I think it is, and on the right we have the FBI. These are the tools of the actual elites, okay? As you would find in, let's say, Hasidic Judaism, you'll have a kind of a rabbinic class, and their job is to keep those people on the plantation. That'd be the same in the Jehovah's Witness. You'll have the elders and you'll have the circuits. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't remember the circuit overseers. You'll have a similar thing in Scientology. I'm not arguing against it. Again, I keep saying the same thing, but it's true. All I'm trying to do is point out that this is how it works. You're in a cult. Just acknowledge it. Just acknowledge it. I'm not asking for any more than that. Oh, yes. Next one. Okay. Encourage spying on other members. Impose a buddy system to monitor and control members. Well, here we are. This is how things all work. I don't spend my time on social media. I mean, I post to Telegram, twice a week or something like that. And I've got my videos and I've got Substack, but I don't spend any time on Facebook or any of this stuff. It's just a complete, it's an attention drain. Why give it to them? But this is my point. Next one. Oh, yes, here you are. Encourage spying on other members. I'll tell you what this reminds me of, just with my background in Soviet studies and so on. It's the Soviet Union. It's called Stukachество. It's kind of like a snitch society. There you are. But they're very selective in the things that they want. They want to back up. That's my point. Again, there is this agenda, it's a plan. You didn't plan it. You didn't wake up one day. I know what I really want is my children to be indoctrinated into the wonders of being a sodomite. No, that never ever happened. Okay, but if you didn't say anything against it, it's because you're a cult member. You see, just admit it, just own it. Get a T-shirt made. Next, I posted a clever status on Facebook, and it was I was the only person who liked it. Yeah, ensure that individual behaviour is monitored by the group, and this is the whole groupthink thing, which I touched on last week. This is how cults work. Well, now we've got people who are so indoctrinated into the idea that the more people who like a thing, or if not enough people like you haven't got enough followers or something like that, this is some terrible thing. Again, it's all if you can still read, I really recommend the really excellent book by Gerrans, and it's The Reign of Quantity and Signs of the Times. This idea of quantity over quality, and that's really what it all boils down to. What they're really saying is that human beings are fungible, that one is just equal to any other one in all cases. But we know that's not true, because if we get on an airplane, we're not fungible anymore. No, suddenly I don't want the cleaning lady to be flying the airplane. I want to go with the 10,000 hours, flying experience. But then when we get back to another situation, suddenly my opinion, and I've spent, let's say, 20,000 hours researching a certain subject, it's just a total equivalence to some guy who's just got an opinion. So this ability to switch in and out of this semi-psychopathic, narcissistic state is itself a characteristic of membership in a cult. That's what you're in. You're in a cult. Wake up. But you won't. In fact, you'll have forgotten. 5 minutes from now, this will mean nothing. Yes, ensure that individual behavior is monitored by the group. So here we are. Here we have however many it is. 25, 24. Individual, amazing, unique. Yes, this word, isn't it interesting? I've mentioned this before. What's happened to the word unique? Unique used to mean one of a kind. Used to mean one of a kind. There could be no other. Unique. Now unique they're all unique. Look at them. Every single one of these people are unique. And unique, every single one of them is unique. And unique in the same way. And you don't see contradiction. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. Extensive use of cult-generated information and propaganda, including newsletters, magazines, journals, audio tapes, videotapes, YouTube, movies, and other media. I can't believe that whoever put this together was so lacking in self-criticism, or even what we call in Russian samaironia, so like self-irony, to have produced this and not seen that this pertains absolutely. What do you think you're living? What do you think your major sources of information are, if not these? Anyway, it doesn't matter, you'll be dead soon. Next one, extensive use of cult-generated information and propaganda, including, the things I just said. Well, here we have social media, which is sort of pseudo-media now, isn't it? There was a time when it was a bit of a Wild West period, but it was quite obvious that it was all going to be locked down by the same people who controlled all the rest of it. But what's interesting is that the way it works now is people self-censor. They won't say any of the things probably that I've said in this. A few people will. They still do. But that's because we're all kind of dumb in terms of getting ahead in this system. Because the words that I've used, I'm not an idiot. I know that the words that I've used in making this video will automatically expel me from the algorithm. I mean, I'm basically shadow banned as it is. And also people don't like to share my stuff, which I've noticed. And in fact, a lot of people, because I can see the analytics, a lot of people watch my stuff, but they won't subscribe to it. They're actually afraid to subscribe to it. Isn't that interesting? Because the idea is that, what most people believe is that the more people who follow one, the more something, the more morons there are in the world. I don't know quite how that works. I work on the medieval principle, which is that of quality. And I'm not trying to be nice to you, but it's true. People don't tend to stick around on my channel, if they're not able to think or at least listen for 40 minutes. Most people can't. They don't want to. So what happens is people make if you've watched the tendency, they're making shorter and shorter, more and more clickbaity kind of videos. I joke about, learning sober QUR'AN in 5 seconds or whatever it is. But that's what you end up, I was shocked when this happened. How much shock can you stand? It's this kind of frenetic emotional level. I mean, it's like everyone's turning into Californians, where everyone's, frantically excited all the time. Do you want to be like an excitable 4-year-old? It's ridiculous. But anyway, it's a cult. There you are. Okay, yes, misquoting statements or using them out of context and from non-cult sources. Now, I got into this one, and I've got a few links that I'm going to show you just to give you this one example. Tucker Carlson, I'm not, a member of the Tucker Carlson club, or I'm not a card-carrying member or anything like that. However, he decided to come to Russia to interview the president of the Russian Federation, the man who's been, maligned for 20 years. Why would you not want to know what this man thinks, especially as, he controls the largest nuclear arsenal in the world, and your governments are unceasingly pushing for war, which will, one way or another, if you keep going, end in nuclear war. Don't you care? Or do you think you can just kind of swipe right or, Control Z or something? No. Death is real. This is not going to go away. Anyway, I just thought I would give you some examples. So just to look a little bit at what the Western media had to say, because obviously they're not going to do this. They're not doing their job. Their only job is to keep you on the plantation. I watched this interview. I watched all of it. I didn't watch it in Russian. There was no need, because the voiceover was done so well. I was actually impressed. Normally Russians mess all that up, but they didn't. They did it very well. And so there was no need. But here are some examples. Vladimir Putin rants about Ukraine in Tucker Carlson interview live. Rants? Does he really rant? Is that what he did? I thought he gave a very measured overview of 1,000 years of history in a short period of time. Poland corrects 10 Putin lies from Tucker Carlson interview. Yes, Tucker Carlson interview, fact-finding Putin's nonsense. See, all I'm trying to say is that Putin, I'm not asking you to like him. I'm not asking you to dislike him. I'm just saying he's an important person in what's going on. And it's indicative, or it's characteristic of a cult, that they are trying to close that down. Now, in Jehovah's Witness speak, Putin is an apostate, or he's an enemy, or whatever it is. Yes, Tucker Carlson is Putin's useful idiot. Putin takes charge as TV host, gives free rein to Kremlin. Tucker Carlson, Putin wasn't journalism, it was sycophancy. There's a video of, there's a clip of a woman who is, I think it's MSNBC, interviewing Zelensky. Now, if that's not sick, it's basically a walk in the park. It's almost like soft porn. But no, my point isn't, that Tucker Carlson is amazing or Putin's amazing or anything. I'm just saying this is what they do if you question anything, which is characteristic of a cult. That's my actual point, okay? Let's move to the next one. Again, they're sort of bashing Tucker Carlson. But I had a point here. Yeah, Putin rants about Ukraine. Putin doesn't rant. If you've never heard him speak, you should listen to him speak. Putin's kind of, he's considered, he's dry, he's got a very acute but appropriate sense of humour, and he's, he'll watch you. He watches you. One thing he doesn't do is rant. Okay, I've never heard Putin rant. Putin repeats nonsense claim that Boris Johnson scuppered efforts to end Ukraine invasion. Is it a nonsense claim? Actually, it's not. What he did do was present actual proof. You remember proof? Remember evidence? Nobody cares about that. Anyway, I just thought what was interesting in this, if I can still find it. Let me see if I can find it. And unfortunately, they changed this quite quickly. Here you are. Yes, here's the next one. Was Tucker Carlson put on Ukrainian kill list after interview? Next one. Tucker Carlson wasn't added to Ukrainian kill list. And then you've got lots of people saying that this is not true. Newsweek fact check. Is Tucker Carlson on Ukrainian kill list? Fact check by Newsweek, false. I'm just using this as one very small example. All right. Now, I happen to speak Russian, okay? So I went to the mirotvorets.center website, which is the Ukrainian kill list that they're talking about. I'm not going to show you the rest of this page because it's unpleasant. I'll just so you know what they do. Here we have a picture here, down here, of Daria Dugina, and it says here, likvidирован, or likvidирована. It means liquidated, killed. She was was the daughter of Dugin, who is a sort of philosopher. And she was murdered by the Ukrainian Special Forces. So liquidated, this is a kill list. This is precisely what it is. And I looked up Tucker Carlson, and guess what? Yes, he is on here. This is his bio, written in Russian, not Ukrainian. Isn't that interesting? Because most Ukrainians actually speak Russian. He's on a kill list. So I'm just giving this to you as one small example. But if you take, for example, the Jehovah's Witness, any criticisms leveled against them are dismissed out of hand as apostate. They're looking at apostate sources. And because it's against them, therefore it's bad. If it's bad, it must be against them. This is a closed circle. This is my point. I'm not asking you to, if you don't know anything about how, the world works by now, this video is hardly going to change any of that. But the point I'm trying to make is look at the similarities between the system that you live in and anything that you would call a cult. Okay, it's the only explanation that makes sense. And if you want, a real dive into, somebody who is a defender of the cult, read this Adam Gabbett's talk show or serious conversation. What he doesn't ever do is get into any of it's all name calling. And if you can really stand it, look up online and watch the 2-hour interview. I'm not asking you to like Carlson, to like Putin, but read that interview. Read this interview, this particular, this article, and then actually watch the interview and make your own mind up. See what you think. Anyway, that's how cults work. Okay, let's move on to the last couple of ones. Unethical use of confession, information about sins used to disrupt and or dissolve identity boundaries. This is what they're doing to society now, turning everything into some idea about race, idea about history. Maybe there's some truth to it. Usually there is. That's the whole thing, is that cults usually have some points of truth which is actually missed by this. So far in this Hassan's bite model, there is usually some truth, some small amount of truth to it. It's like with feminism. I mean, yeah, okay, it's delusional and it's destroyed millions of families and especially young men throughout over the last 50 years. But there is some kernel of truth there somewhere. If you listen to it, you kind of think, yeah, well, maybe it is. And it's like this with all of these points, but that's not where they're going. They've got somewhere else that they're going, and this is the whole point about it. So now they've got whites, just kind of, I don't know, crying crocodile tears over something they don't know. They don't know anything about it. They don't have any history. And actually, my opinion, all this white privilege nonsense is another form of racism. They actually think that if they kind of humiliate themselves enough, that all the darkies, as they see it, will come and give them a great big hug, and somehow they'll kind of spread their whiteness onto them. They're not actually, they still, in a way, this whole narrative presupposes some sort of white supremacy. And can't you see that? Anyway, next. Yeah, here we are. Unethical use of confession, withholding forgiveness or absolution. And so here we have whites who never owned slaves begging forgiveness from blacks who never were slaves. I'm not saying slavery is good. I'm just saying, can't you see that this is a cult? Now, if you want to see some actual slavery, here you are. Here's some. This is the next point. Manipulation of memory, possible false memories. Well, here we have Russian serfs, white Russian serfs at the end of the 19th century. Here we have whites in the US at the end of the 19th century. Here we have white children in the US in living memory, just about. Okay, people have suffered. People do suffer. I mean, the white serfs in Russia were freed about the same time as the black slaves in America. Why? Because society as a whole came to the view that slavery, or at least obvious slavery, was wrong. But as I've mentioned before, I've lived in this country 23 years. I speak the language fluently. Do you know how many Russians I've heard complaining about how they were oppressed because they were serfs? None. Not one. Anyway, here you are. We'll close with this. These are some white children today in South Africa. So all I'm trying to say is I'm not asking you to like or dislike or accept unquestioningly any of the points that I've made in this. What I'm trying to illustrate to you is that by going through this list of points on this piece of paper of information control, which pertains to all cults, okay, what Stephen Hassan has done is draw together general characteristics which apply across the board and just applied them to what you live in. We find that, at least so far as the 2 pages out of 4 that we've looked at, the Western, in fact I would say it's not just Western, it's anywhere that submits to and applies technique, i.e. a modern society, meets all of those criteria. Isn't that interesting? At least it is to me. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.